This podcast is part of the Big Heads Media Podcast Network. Go to bigheadsmedia.com for more great podcasts.
And now, on with the show.
Hey everyone, welcome to...
We're watching here.
This is Opinionated Movie Talk with Chris and Perry. My name is Chris Williams. With me, he is the Harvey Keitel to my William Hurt, Perry Seibert. How are you doing, Perry?
Oh, yay. All I've ever wanted to be is Harvey Keitel. I'm so excited. You know, I watched my Father's Day ended exactly the way all Father's Day should this year. I watched Mean Streets. I showed it to Emma, my oldest, who had never seen it before. And we're about halfway through. And we paused it for some reason, go to the bathroom, something. And we were sitting back down, and she looked at me and said, you know, Harvey Keitel's hot. It's like, all right. Yeah, I'm good with that. Yes, you go, girl.
You're raising them right.
Exactly.
Oh, Perry, how have you been?
I've been good. I've been watching Mean Streets with my daughter. I couldn't be better, Chris. How are you?
I watched 1941 alone.
Well, at least you didn't hurt anyone else. I appreciate that you cared enough.
But other than that, I am very excited to be here. We are continuing our 5 from 95 series, and we are going to be talking about Wayne Wang's Smoke. But before we do that, we usually get into what we've been watching lately. But Perry, I know you are a big Academy Awards fan. And it was recently announced that the Academy Awards are going to be held in April of 2021 because of the pandemic. And I was curious, what are your thoughts on that?
It's not so much that it's moving to April, it's that they're extending the entire thing 2 months. So the eligibility period for films is now extended to February 8th of 2021. And while I think that's glorious thinking on behalf of the Academy, I personally am of the belief that unless there's some sort of actual medical cure or protection for us, this is not going to be happening. I don't see how there will be that this will be safe or a reasonable thing to do. The math I don't understand is, at what percentage do the theaters need to be open to make releasing the movies worthwhile for the studios?
Sure.
I know that Tenet wants to be the first one out of the gate, but I can't believe Warner Brothers is going to release that if they can only sell 25% of the possible movie tickets they could sell. I just don't see how. If everything changes and we can all go back to the theaters and the risk level is the same that it is when we're talking, because I don't assume that as we're recording this, Chris, it couldn't be completely different in 2-3 weeks. I don't see how that's at all feasible. I think the Academy would be real smart to, and I think eventually they will just have to cancel the year. And I think you just allow for 2 years worth of stuff. I think you just extend out the acceptable movie release dates and chalk it up to that. I think that's where it will go. Because again, as we've talked about over and over, I don't understand how, until production can ramp up again to its full degree, you're always going to have less material that will be eligible. So I don't understand. It's great to talk about, well, let's say there's a cure in a year and a half. We could have one at the end of the year and then do one again real quick, like 4 months later. I don't think so. I don't understand how that's going to work. So I would love it if it happens. If it happens, that means the world is much more back to normal than I expect it to be. But I am dubious that will actually be the case.
I kind of feel the same way. You mentioned, these theaters are not going to be to anything near capacity. I think AMC, their plan is 30% capacity. But that's just the United States. You figure, especially these movies by Warner Brothers or Disney, they depend on that global box office. And, theaters might open here a little bit at a time, but if you don't also have that European, that China box office, you're going to lose a lot of money. So I don't know at what point it makes fiscal sense for them to say, let's open it up and, at least we'll make a quarter of what we spent. And then you factor in something like Tenet, which Christopher Nolan, wants to save the movies, but he's also a very big on spoilers getting out for his movies. And if you release this before half the world can see it, he's not going to be too thrilled about that. No. I don't know. I'm a little more optimistic that maybe we'll see some open, barring a second wave in September or October. But again, that's barring a second wave, and I don't think we've managed the first wave very well. So I'm not overly hopeful. From a personal perspective, I assume that if Oscars are pushed back and eligibility is pushed back, that means critics groups might be pushed back a little bit. And I do have to admit that sitting around with a stack of screeners in January and February is much preferable to sitting around with a stack of screeners at Christmas time. So there's a part of me that feels a little okay with that. But also, I don't know, there's a part of me that feels like if they are going to have an Oscars, if they're dead set on that, then do it on the films that were released this year, even if they were released online, which they did change the eligibility for that. But you have a lot of indie films that were the only shows in town this year. And there's a chance for a really, I don't want to say a memorable or great Oscar ceremony based on what was released, but it would definitely be interesting. You would see someone like Ben Affleck maybe having a shot at a nomination for The Way Back, which is a performance I really liked. Or, some of these smaller films that were released earlier in the year. And having some of these smaller, quirkier films get more of the conversation than they have, instead of having it lumped in with everything released in January and February. But then again, you're also making sure that a Martin Lawrence as Best Supporting Actor for Bad Boys for Life does not happen. So, which I
think we'd all feel really good about. I gotta be honest.
As of right now, end of June, Bad Boys for Life is the highest grossing movie of the entire year, which is just weird.
Yes.
And I say that as someone who had a good time with Bad Boys for Life. But, if that is the pinnacle of our movie year, that's sad. And again, my last film in the theater was Sonic the Hedgehog. So, I don't think there's a winner in this situation at all. I think you're right. This eventually just doesn't happen. And we look at a extended Oscar season in the next year, which could be a fascinating thing to try and figure out. But yeah, you bring up a good point. With if you look at TV right now, they're anticipating a programming drought starting in about September, and I can't, unless we want a bunch of Zoom themed movies to be filling screens, I don't know.
And we do not.
We do not. I don't know what we're looking at. It's fascinating. It's weird. It'll be interesting to see what happens with that. But we are going to take a break from talking about our hellscape of a year that is 2020. And we are going to go back to a simpler time, back to 1995, to continue our series on 5 from 95, 5 films we really enjoyed from 25 years ago. And we have previously covered David Fincher's Seven and Kevin Smith's Mallrats. Perry, you chose this week's film, so I'm going to let you take it away with why you chose Smoke, a movie I had not heard of until you suggested it.
Because at the time it was my favorite movie of 1995.
Okay.
A film. So I forget my top 10 lists from year to year pretty quickly. I don't remember. I don't care. Top 10s are a snapshot. They're not supposed to be carved and etched in stone. Even Sight and Sound has the decency to every 10 years do a new poll to find out what the greatest film of all time is. Things change. That said, for whatever reason, Smoke, Seven, Casino, and The Usual Suspects, and Sense and Sensibility, I have been able to retain forever from 1995 because I love all 5 of them. a great deal and for different reasons. And at the time, Smoke was my favorite film of those 5. And it still very well could be on any given day. I'm probably willing to give 7 the nod these days. But I still think Smoke is a glorious movie. It is made by Wayne Wang. Actually, one of the few films you'll ever see where the film by credit is shared by the director and the screenwriter. Wayne Wang let Paul Auster share the film by credit at the beginning of the movie because it's adapted from a short story that Paul Auster wrote that was originally published in the New York Times on Christmas Day called Augie Wren's Christmas Story. And Smoke is your quintessential mid-90s indie, distributed by Miramax, and it's about people talking. It's about people hanging out and talking. And because it's by Paul Auster, who is one of my very favorite novelists, it's not only about stories, but it's about the stories we process, the things we need to process. That's what all of his works are about. And this is no exception. Harvey Keitel and William Hurt, I think they're the co-leads. I think that's a safe thing to say in the movie. Harvey Keitel plays the owner of the local smoke shop in Brooklyn, where all the characters live and hang out, and where Paul Auster lives as well. William Hurt plays a writer who had a traumatic thing happen in his past, which we learn about fairly early in the movie, and it is about that classic phrase, the intersecting lives of all the people that show up at the tobacco store over the course of, I think, about a year. I think it's about a year in real time that the movie takes place over. Yeah. And I remember seeing it in 1995 and just jaw-dropping fell in love with it right away. I think I saw it at least 3 times in the theater. And I have committed much of it to memory ever since then.
I like I said, I had never heard of this film before. I would have been in 1995, depending the time of the year it was released. I would have been a sophomore or junior in high school. So this probably wouldn't have been the movie I was running off to see with my friends. So I can kind of see it's a smaller indie film, like you say. I can see where maybe it just would have been bypassed by me. And when I looked it up after you had recommended it, there was a part of me that got a little nervous because I'm like, oh, it's about people hanging out at a tobacco shop. Is this pretentious Clerks? You know? And I have to say, from the first scene in this movie, which is this, it's a conversation, but it's really a pretty lengthy monologue by William Hurt's character about the history of smoking in England.
Yes.
And it is so beautifully written. Like the dialogue at that moment is so beautifully written, but in a way where the wrong actor would totally derail the movie. And William Hurt is the right actor. I ate this up. The movie's actually bookended by 2 fantastic monologues by William Hurt and Harvey Keitel, and it's been a long time since I've watched a movie and just loved to listen to the language. You can definitely tell Paul Auster, is a writer, and I didn't know that when I saw that. I didn't know much about the movie until afterwards when I looked up who was involved. I am not very familiar with Paul Auster's work. I would like that to change after this movie because it is a really delicate, beautiful little screenplay that if you don't have the right people in there, they're gonna, those words are gonna sound wrong. They're gonna sound pretentious or overly flowery. But if they hit it right, which they do in the movie throughout, then it's just a beautiful thing to sit and listen to and to take in a very warm movie. Like, it's a very, very... warm is the word that keeps coming back. It is a friendly movie. It is a movie where I like to see the characters interact. I think William Hurt is fantastic. Harvey Keitel... Wow, I can't talk today. Harvey Keitel is fantastic.
Forrest Whitaker is fantastic.
Forrest
Stockard
Whitaker
Channing's fantastic.
Yes.
It's the first time I ever saw Harold Perrineau Jr.
That's what I was going to say.
A really good actor, and he's fantastic here. Ashley Judd's great in it. it is an actor's showcase through and through, and it is a bunch of scenes that could be mistaken for showstoppers, that are, supposed to be these grand moments, and they are, but they aren't. They're all delivered conversationally. There's no big histrionic moment, and even when there are a couple of those, they are undercut almost immediately by something really funny, or really just out of the unexpectedly normal.
Yeah,
that grounds it all again, and it's just, yeah. I can gush and get stupid about this movie.
Harold Perrineau, I was most familiar with him from Lost, so it kind of clicked when I saw him show up. I'm like, oh yeah, that's Michael from Lost. But he plays this young man who crosses paths with William Hurt.
Literally.
Literally. and they form this relationship that in any other movie I've seen is always, this kind of paternalistic, old man teaches the young man how to grow up and get his life together. But Rashid, Harold Perrineau's character, he goes off on his own movie after that, and where he goes is just as fascinating and just as it's a plot line that could have been overly dramatic, and he connects with Forrest Whitaker, who he has a history with, and that does not go where I thought. It sets up, like you said, these big dramatic screaming matches that don't happen, and it's because the characters feel real. They respond like real characters would, and they kind of roll with the new information they're given, and there's just a sense of goodwill among every relationship in this movie. Harvey Keitel, I haven't seen him quite like this before, where he is this warm and lovable of a character. Just he's a good guy. He is a good person, not because he's saintly, not because he has no flaws, but there is a warmth to Augie that I found very endearing. That monologue at the final scene of the film is just a one shot on him telling a story that I didn't check, but has to be about 10 minutes long. Just him.
It's a full mag, and the camera dollies in so closely. It pushes into his face slowly, consistently, and it is in the best sense of the word hypnotic. Yeah, it's a fantastic story that he tells.
Yeah, and we see that later on, like shortly after, we see a recreation of what he's been talking about. I didn't need that either, because the way he sells that moment is so good that I had that story playing in my head as he's telling it. And
yep.
When it plays out over the credits, I was like, yeah, that's exactly what I had in my mind. But it's also the sense at that scene where the scene ends, where the movie ends with Augie telling that story to Paul's character, or to Paul. It works because it's not just Harvey Keitel giving a hell of a performance. It is these two characters who kind of start off as acquaintances, throughout the movie build this friendship, and by the end it's just that comfort where they are telling their secrets to each other. They are comfortable enough to let it spill, which is what this movie is about. It is finding those people you're comfortable sharing those stories with and the story of your life with. And I kept waiting. I kept waiting and dreading the moment where everything would click at the end and you would see everything is connected and snaps into place very cleanly, because that is what a lot of these type of movies do that balance multiple plot lines like this. And I was so relieved that it never happens, that there are some threads we don't get to see the full resolution. They're not connected by anyone but Augie. And they might just be his story that he's dealing with while Paul and Rashid are dealing with something else. And I love the fact that they don't need to line that up. It feels more real. It doesn't feel too smart for its own good. Like I said, I had never heard of this, and I walked away just very happy to have seen it. It's the type of movie that you kind of feel a little happier when you're done watching.
Yeah, it is everything that is, it is everything an American indie should be.
Mm-hmm.
And it is if you are unfamiliar with the work of Paul Auster, I can't recommend his novels enough. They all deal with, like I said, they're all at some level about storytelling, quite in a very meta way. The characters in them tell stories, and they're often stories about stories. And there's a bunch of the stuff that is, if you're familiar with his novels, is the sudden acquisition and loss of a huge chunk of money.
Okay.
Figures prominently in so many of his films. Money is used as a metaphor for luck in many of his novels. Fathers and sons come up repeatedly, and yeah, it's the I would recommend to you, Chris, if you're truly interested in digging in. Probably my favorite book of his is one called The Book of Illusions. Paul writes really, really beautifully about movies in his books. And I don't mean, I mean, I do sometimes literally talking about a real movie in his books, but he uses movies and people who are drawn to movies, and he can describe movies in really great ways. And so I would start you off there. I'm not saying it is his very best, but it's the one I tend to return to the most. And it's probably the biggest cinematic influence on it. That's a really great one. And I would encourage you then to look up, if you've never heard of him, I would encourage you to seek out another earlier 90s indie. Oh, was it earlier? I think it came out before. One of his novels was actually adapted into a movie called The Music of Chance.
Okay.
Great book, very good movie with James Spader and Mandy Patinkin.
Okay.
That again, they make for a fine double feature. Smoke to me is much better, which is not to say The Music of Chance is bad. Just to say, I think Smoke is one of my very favorite films ever. And I would encourage you to seek that out. It's a very strange little tale about an obsessive gambler and a guy who meets up with him, and they end up sort of in a state of indentured servitude, making a wall. Yes, it sounds very Waiting for Godot-ish, because it is. But it's also really odd and very funny, and a great, great James Spader performance. I saw The Music of Chance before I ever read the book, and there's a sequence in the movie where Mandy Patinkin's character sings like part of an aria. And I assumed when I saw the movie, oh, well, they did this. This can't possibly be in the book. And, oh, it's totally in the book. It's absolutely in the book. It's right out of the book. And that can happen in the fictional world of Paul Auster.
So as we were talking, I actually went over to Amazon and I added the Book of Illusions into my Kindle. I'm going on a vacation in a week, and I need some reading, and that sounds like a good place to start. I was really taken with just the little details that he builds about the characters that don't necessarily have a quote-unquote payoff. I love that Augie takes the pictures every day of the outside of the shop. And just, whoever ventures into the frame that day ventures in and makes it into that picture. And early in the film, William Hurt's character finds that one of the people in his picture was his wife, who died. And I, again, kept waiting for some little payoff, some little way to connect that. And it doesn't. It just is a nice way to draw them together. And it gives you some shading into who William Hurt's character is and who Augie is. But there's not a need to just connect that to a bigger point at the end, which I appreciate it. It feels real. I think Forrest Whitaker is fantastic in this too. He has maybe one of the best family picnics I've seen in a movie, where I don't think he says 2 words the entire scene. He sits there quiet for most of that scene, but he's such a presence in that. And it's a fantastic moment. Stockard Channing is really good to watch. I mean, I could just list everyone in this movie, and they're good.
Yeah.
really surprised me.
It's a bunch of amazing actors doing amazing work because they have an amazing script.
Yeah. And I was curious, this film, was this nominated for... This wasn't nominated for Best Screenplay, was it?
No, it was not.
I'm gonna
it was far too tiny and indie.
That, although I did look up, it made I think like 4 times back its budget. It made $38 million, which is not anything to sniff at for an indie. I was really surprised I hadn't heard of this. I was very surprised to hear that it also had a sequel come out that same year.
Yes, Blue in the Face.
And how is that? I have not even heard of that one either.
So Blue in the Face was truly, they shot a bunch of stuff of the guys who hang out at the cigar shop regularly, just kind of hanging out. And even that cast, I mean, that's Giancarlo Esposito is one of those guys. The kid, the seemingly mentally off kid who sweeps up out front is Jared Harris. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's really an amazing cast. And they had so much fun making the movie that they basically talked Miramax into letting them have like another $500,000 to make. It's not a sequel. It's sort of a companion film.
Okay.
That was completely improvised.
Oh,
and
okay.
I mean, literally, there's no plot. Like, it's just people hanging out telling stories. And the highlights of Blue in the Face include Jim Jarmusch shows up. It has a very funny speech. Lou Reed shows up and tells a story. It's very loose and very ramshackle. It is nothing you need to seek out. It is not a sequel.
Okay.
I don't want to put that much weight on it by any means. It is this little curiosity that, again, is everything you want an indie film to do, to just play and have some fun. And that's all it is doing. It is of absolutely zero relevance. But if you adore smoke as much as I do, you might want to check it out eventually.
I had a critic. There's a critic I follow, Jeffrey Overstreet, and I wanted to see if he had seen this. So I went on his Letterboxd. He had seen it. He really enjoyed it, and he mentioned that this is a movie that it makes sense to bring back and do as a TV show. And I usually cringe at ideas like that, but there is a part of me that thinks I would love to linger on these characters, more or similar characters. But also, it's a very delicate thing. Like, this is I kept coming back to the idea that this screenplay, in the hands of anyone else, in the hands of anyone who is not this cast or this director, could land very badly. It could be a very overdone thing, and you can just feel like this. Everything feels right in it, and I keep coming back to that. But it's a movie that just left me with a feeling of just being very happy and enjoying time with these characters. And yeah, I'm looking at the screenplay nominees for 96. So would this have been an adapted screenplay or a original?
Yes.
Okay.
It would have been adapted.
So the winner that year was Sense and Sensibility. And the other nominees were Apollo 13, Babe, Leaving Las Vegas, and The Postman.
Yeah, it's better than 4 of those movies.
And
it's a better script than 4 of those scripts. 3.5.
Yeah. Do you have anything else to say on this one? Because I know I'm going to let you do the heavy lifting on most of this, but I feel like I keep coming away with just, it made me happy, and sometimes that's enough. But I said it earlier quite accidentally. I didn't plan on it, but it's if you take away anything from this conversation, it really is just you get to watch amazing actors in gears you don't usually see them in. You talk about you never remember seeing Harvey Keitel this warm before. You rarely see William Hurt this sort of befuddled. Like he's in emotional distress at the beginning of this movie, and not in a showy, intense way. He's just lost, and you quickly find out why. And his arc is how he pulls out of that through these interactions with these people. And I'd love to have a conversation with
some of our youngers about William Hurt, because I have no understanding of if they even know who he is or what he is to them. But William Hurt was such a major figure in the 80s, and I grew up with him as this really towering figure in my mind. I've talked many times on this show about how much The Big Chill means to me. William Hurt is a colossal presence when I think back about when I was learning about film and loving film for the first time. And so to see him and do this in this movie is just a sheer joy for me, as it is to watch Harvey Keitel deliver that last monologue. Keitel is one of my very favorite actors and has been to undersung for so long. There's that wonderful line in David Thompson's book, The Biographical Dictionary of Film, where he talks about, to be Harvey Keitel, to be the great. Think about what it would like to play Harvey Keitel in a movie. That you would be probably the greatest actor of your generation, to be restless in your artistic pursuits, and yet to constantly be second banana to De Niro, to never be the most famous guy, even though you should be. He said it's such a great part, and De Niro would probably get it. Like that's right. That's how I feel about Keitel, who I adore in everything, and this is one of my very favorite Keitel performances. It's so fun to talk about this after recently going back to Mean Streets again for, I don't know, the 100th time. To see those two performances 22 years apart, you just realize the breadth and scope of what he's accomplished is just magnificent.
There's that great moment where Paul and Rashid bump into Augie at the bar, and Keitel is just so charming in that he's out there with a date, and it's such a charming, just charismatic moment. But he can also, he's Harvey Keitel. He carries this, this background with him that a few scenes later, when Rashid's working at the store and makes a mistake, I instantly had a oh shit moment. Like, where is this movie going now? Because I know Harvey Keitel, and I don't know that this turns out well for Rashid. Which then leads into another great scene where Paul kind of plays peacemaker between Rashid and Augie, which is, again, it brings up a plot point that the movie had mentioned maybe 5 minutes earlier with some discovered money. It gets rid of that money right there. Doesn't have to mention that again, but it just sets up that wonderful, very funny scene where you have Harold Perrineau, who is going toe to toe with Harvey Keitel, just in terms of kind of giving back a little bit of smugness, a little bit of busting his chops a little bit. It's just
refusing to lose an inch of face.
Yeah,
that's what that sequence is about.
Yeah, it's so well played. I haven't seen Harold Perrineau in many things lately since Lost, but he's really good in this. It's a role that any other young actors may have gotten lost in, but he plays it with kind of a wisdom past his years and a confidence that I haven't seen in a young actor in a while. His moment where he first confronts Forrest Whitaker's character, again, that's going toe to toe with another great actor and not backing down. Mm-hmm. But it's not in an angry way. It is in just a confident, I know what I'm doing here. I know how to deal with people, and it just leads to another great thread for the movie to go down. And I think was this Ashley Judd's first movie as well?
I think I don't think it's the first, but it was one of the first.
Okay.
Get all those. It's been too long since I've thought about like when Ruby in Paradise came out and other stuff she did early on. But it's one of the very early ones.
Yeah, she gets one scene in this movie and she's fantastic. And
you'll remember it.
Yep. It is a I mean I could just. Maybe I should just tell people to go see the movie. But I am really glad you brought up this movie to talk about, because I really enjoyed this. I will be going back and watching this one again over the years. It's just one of my favorite things to do is just, like you say, watch good actors in conversation together. Movies where they just get to talk is one of my favorite things. And this was much better than Mallrats, I have to say.
And if you really love it and want to dig just a little deeper, you can actually it was released. It's doubtful it's still in print, but the screenplay was published along with the screenplay for Blue in the Face, and additionally in that booklet was the original short story that Auster wrote that was published in the New York Times Christmas Day in the early 90s, called Augie Wren's Christmas Story. And it's really great to read that story and to see the germ that developed into that movie. Those two big speeches that you like so much, those two big scenes, where he flips through all the photographs, and the story Keitel tells at the end are both in that story, both in the short story. And to realize that they knew exactly where to start from and how brilliantly they weave all of the themes around what's established in those two sequences is just it gives you it's one of those few instances where you can see really good storytellers doing their job. There are very few times where you get to see it develop like that things don't just spring whole cloth at once. They are developed and they are massaged through the writing process. It's really great.
It is. We haven't even really talked Wayne Wang much, and I think this might be my only movie that I've seen by him. But it's deceptively, a movie like this makes it seem deceptively easy. The idea is you just point your camera at, but it's really hard to make sure you get those performances out of those actors to kind of sell this reality, especially when that script is so literate. This is not a movie where people talk like people talk. This is a movie like people talk in novels, and he definitely sells it with energy and heart that again someone else could have made this and it'd be a thundering bore. Just if you're not doing that right. I'm looking at Wayne Wang's filmography in recent years, and Made in Manhattan.
There's nothing as good as this there. I have to admit, I am in the minority of quite liking Center of the World, which is the movie I think he made after this, and after both of them, which is a very off-putting little indie. With two actors that I love a great deal, and I just enjoy watching the two of them together. And it was a very infamous movie for other reasons, which we don't need to get into at the moment. But I actually like that movie. And other than that, I don't know what he's been up to since Made in Manhattan.
Well, he does a fantastic job with this, and I think that's a good place to leave it. So this was our third movie in our 5 from 95, and you can go back and listen to our thoughts on Seven and our thoughts on Mallrats. Our next entry in this will be Terry Gilliam's 12 Monkeys, which I have not seen in a few years, so I am looking forward to revisiting that. And again, it's yet another Brad Pitt movie. After Fight Club last year and Seven a few weeks ago, 95 was a really good year for Brad Pitt. So we'll be talking that in a few weeks.
It was a good year for him.
Perry, in the meantime, where can people find you?
You can find me on Facebook. You can hear me every Friday morning on 1290 WLBY AM in Ann Arbor on the Lucienne Land Show. You can find me on Twitter at Perry Loves Film. And you can hear me probably squealing with the anticipation as I try to race through all the things that I want to see. They're going to leave the Criterion Channel at the end of the month.
Is there a lot leaving in July or June?
When we record this, I've got 8 days left to see. There's 3 of the Buñuel films I would love to get to before they disappear.
Okay, yeah. There's. I don't like how short some of those stay on there. Disney Plus doesn't take stuff off. I'll just say that.
No, they just edit Hamilton.
They edit Hamilton and give us Artemis Fowl. Thanks, Disney. Well, you can find me at BHM Pop Culture. That's where I write my movie reviews. You can find me on Twitter and Facebook. I did forget, my wife and I have launched a website where we write occasionally. It's yoked.blog. And you can listen to my other podcast, Wasting Time, which should be starting back up in the next few weeks after a coronavirus-related stand-down for the last few months. We will be back in a few weeks talking about 12 Monkeys.